Okay. Wanted to make sure that I didn't mess up here. You know what I think, Steve? Maybe I should raise with you the following question. Maybe we should use the same link for all the shiurim. What's the drawback in that? I see that's what they do over there, in that Hagefen place where I gave the shiur yesterday. I think they use the same, different lecturers come on the same link.
We'd be coming into previous sessions, or people would be coming into previous meetings that they're not involved with. So I don't know if that'll disturb you while you're talking.
Well, again, I'm just thinking out loud, if people realize that it's 10:45, now it's time to join the shiur. And if they don't see me or anybody else on the screen, they know it's not yet 10:45 or we haven't started the meeting yet. I'm not sure. I don't know. I want to think this out because it would save me a little bit of nervous tension because I wouldn't always have to be constantly thinking, hey, did I press on the wrong link? Okay.
Right. I don't know if you update it anymore, so it doesn't make any difference. Before you used to have, a little connection as to the link and what the shiur was about. It said it was about Pesukim or about Sanhedrin. You can have that in there, but it doesn't.
The Zoom doesn't know the difference between one name and the other. So I could change the names and go into what's called Zoom settings, but let me put this all on what's it called? Mute. Do I do that? Okay, I think I did that. All right. So we're now in Sanhedrin on Daf Samaches Amud Beis, in the middle of the Amud. We started this sugya of Ad Sheyakif HaZakan HaTachton, correct? And we had the brisa of Rav Chia, which was interpreted by Rav Dimi. So I'm just giving a quick overview of what we did. And we're talking about what is the ceiling, the oldest age where he's called Gvuras Ish. He's no longer a candidate for Ben Tzora Morer, and that's called Sheyakif HaZakan HaTachton, which Rabbi Chia in his brisa says means Sheyakif HaTorah. And Rabbi Dimi explains what does that mean? Hakafas Gid, v'lo Hakafas Beitzim. So again, these are different stages in the development of the pubic hairs, and the Gemara identifies it not as the later stage, which is going to come, months down the line, which is Yaakov es HaBeitzim, but even in an earlier stage, he's already out of the picture. He's already too old. He's a Gvuras Ish, and he's out of the picture in an earlier stage, which is called Hakafas Gid. Hakafas Gid. All right. Now, what we began to embark upon yesterday, which I'd like to pick up today, is to put this distinction of age groups. There's a Katan who doesn't have Cyrus, then he becomes a Gadol which stays Cyrus, and he hasn't yet reached the level of Hakafas Gid, which is called Hakafas HaTorah. So that's the middle stage, and then the oldest stage, which is Hakafas Beitzim. Well, actually, let me correct myself. What we're saying is that once he reaches from Shtei Saras past the line of Hakafas Gid, which is right way before Hakafas Beitzim, he's already considered too old to qualify as a Ben Tzora. So basically, there's no difference between Hakafas Gid and Hakafas HaBeitzim, because now we're saying that once he reaches the level of Hakafas HaGid, that's already considered Yaakov Zakan HaTachton, and he's out of the ballpark. So the middle stage, that window of time in the development of the young man, in which he's a candidate for Ben Mora, that window of time is between Shtei Saros and Hakafas Hagid. Okay, then? So what we embarked upon yesterday was the possibility that we can find a corresponding parallel in the laws of a Nara, where the Torah differentiates between Ktana, Nara, and Bogeres, 3 levels. And these 3 levels will parallel the 3 levels in a boy of Katan, Shtei Saros, and Hakafas Hagid. So that Shtei Saros, up until Hakafas Hagid, is parallel to Nara, that middle stage in the case of a young woman. Do we have it so far? Again, if I had a whiteboard, I could chart it out on a whiteboard. It's always going to be 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3 on the female side and 1, 2, 3 on the male side. You know, in our society, you have to make those distinctions. Anyway. So, what I want to discuss with you is on the female side for a moment. There also is this biological distinction between a Nara and a Bogeres in terms of the saros, the pubic hairs. And this has to do with the Gemara on Daf Samach Vavam days earlier in the Masechet Sanhedrin, which is called Ribui Shachar al Halavan. So apparently there are lighter colored pubic hairs and darker colors. The darker colors are more indicative of permanent maturation. And once a young girl gets to the point in which most of the saros are shachar and not lavan, she's considered a bogeres. Until that point, she has both saros lavanos and saros shchoros. She is considered a nara. So it means when she reaches the state of ribui shachar ala lavan, that's parallel to the state of Hakafas Hagid in the case of a male. Again, getting back to our imaginary chart. Now, what we're going to try to establish, and for this we'll take a look in the Rambam Hilchos Ishus. Let me just get out a Rambam Hilchos Ishus if you happen to have one handy. One second, I have mine in the other room. So we're going to look for a moment in Perek Beis, Mehilchos Ishus, Halacha Chaf Beis. Now, in order to appreciate the Rambam in Halacha Chav Beis, we're just going to look a little bit earlier. And the Rambam says, like in Halacha Yud Zayin, he says, Shtei Saras Elu Tzrichos Sheyu B'Mokom Ervus. He's talking about a woman who leaves the state of Katnus, of a Ketana, and she enters into the next level, which is called a Nara, through Shtei Saros. And the Shtei Saros are B'Mokom Erva. Now he says the following. We need what's called a bedika. Bodkim al pi noshim ksheros is halacha chav v'nemonos. V'afilu isha achas bodekis. So one woman can serve as a bodekes and testify to the fact that this girl is already a nara. She already has shtei saros. Then in Halacha Chav Beis, he writes, Ein somchin el al hanoshim b'minyan hashonim v'lo al akrovim el al pishnayim anoshim ksherim lahoy. So in order to appreciate this halach in the Rambam, Halacha Chav Beis, we go back to Halacha Yud Ches for a moment, and the Rambam writes that it's not enough that the girl has two saros to be considered a nara. She needs also shonim. What does shonim mean? The Rambam writes, Habashe via shtei saros b'toch shtei masrei shana. So she saw shtei saros before she hit her 12th birthday, so she's only 11 years old. Shuma. Shuma means that that's not considered halachic saros. So we need shonim, which is 12 in the case of a girl, to upgrade the status of her shuma to the status of shtei saros. And then Halacha Chav Aleph called shonim amuros lo shnei alevanav lo shnei achama el shonim shel seder ha'ibur. So the Rambam tells you that we need to determine shonim in a very specific halachic way. We're not going to go into the details now. And now we need two elements. In order to establish a girl as a nara, we need, number one, to testify about shtei saros. And we need to know shonim, how old she is. And that depends upon the shnos seder ha'ibur. So the Rambam writes there are two different halachas. With regard to shtei saros, somchin al anoshim, we can rely even on one woman who testifies that she has shtei saros. But with regard to minyan hashonim, how old she is, then ein somchin al anoshim b'minyan hashonim v'lo al akrovim el al pi shnayim anoshim ksherim lahoy. We need two men who will testify. Now, in the footnote that I have here, I don't think you have the Rambam. He writes, this is based on the Gemara in Kiddushin Samach Gimel, and Tosfos there says that in Yesh Lahem Ribui Saros, Somchin Aleim, Ki Ein Darkam Lovo Kodem Yud Beis Yud Gimel Shonim. So I don't know if the Rambam agrees to this, but basically Tosfos has the opinion that sometimes from the Saris itself you can determine the Shanim, because it couldn't be Shuma if there's, that like developed Ribui Saros, he calls it. So sometimes you can have Ribui Saros, according to Tosfos, that replaces the need for Shanim, meaning we don't have to determine how old she is if there's Ribui, if there's a multitude of Saros, because if she was only 11 years old, then we don't anticipate that she would have Ribui Saros. She must be already 12. So we don't have to go through this whole rigmarole of Adam testifying she was born on such a day, and we counted the Ibur in such and such a this, and therefore she's 12 years. All right. Okay, now let's see if we can put things together here. Fundamentally, we have to ask ourselves the following question. We want to establish that this girl has reached gadlus or bagus. Those are synonymous terms. Now that could be relevant. For example, there are many different repercussions to her status as a bogeres, but one halach that comes to mind is whether or not she's in the rishus of her father to get married, or she's in her own independent rishus. So, for example, in the case of a nara, a father can marry off his daughter because she's a nara, but in case of bogeres, he cannot. So what we have here is what's called a davar shebe'erva, meaning the marriage status of this woman would change, would be impacted, be affected by whether she's a gedola, i.e. a bogeres, or a nara. So if that be the case, then we have a principle called ein davar shebe'erva pachos mishnayim. I may have mentioned it the other day, that you cannot establish something that's relevant to arayos, in this case, to whether or not she's married, but if the father, blah, 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 unless you have two Eidim. Now, the Rambam writes that as far as Saros are concerned, to establish her status, then we rely on the Bedika of even one woman. But as far as Shanim are concerned, which is another precondition to her being a Gdola, a bogeres, we need two Eidim. So the Rambam seems basically to be operating within the framework of ein davar shebe'erva pachos mishnayim. We need two Eidim to establish that she is a Gdola. However, with regard to checking out the specific Saros, we rely on one woman. Why? We don't know. That right now we'll leave that as an open-ended question. Somehow, magically, the testimony of one woman becomes upgraded to the status of Shnei Eidim. only with regard to the Sarah. Now, remember that we spoke about this two-sided tablet. How do you say tabla in English? Not a tablet. What do you call it? A chart, right? So we had a chart with two parts to it. We had the Isha, the Kevashit goes through 3 stages, and now we have the Zohar who goes through 3 stages. I mean, keep in mind that the 3 stages in the case of a Zohar, that number 3 is only relevant to Ben Sorah Umorah. It has no implications elsewhere. In Kol HaTorah Kula, for every single halachic issue, once the Katan has Shtei Saros, we don't have to wait until Ashi Yaakov Es Hagid. That halacha of Ashi Yaakov Es Hagid only applies to Ben Sorah Umorah. It has no implications beyond the context of Ben Sorah Umorah. Because once he has Shtei Saros and he's a gadol for all dinim of the Torah. Okay. So let me ask you the following question. Do we need 2 Eidim to establish that it's Yaakov Es Hagid, that this young man has already reached the age level beyond Ben Sorah Umorah, meaning when he's Yaakov Es Hagid? And if we take our parallel to Nara, to its logical conclusion, then just like the Rambam requires 2 Eidim, fundamentally, again, you have to know about that exception to the rule about 1 Isha in Bedika. But fundamentally, we need 2 Eidim to establish her as a Gedolah. In a parallel sense, we're going to require 2 Eidim to establish that Gadlus in a Zachar of Ashi Yaakov, which in that case takes him out of the parasha of Ben Sorah Umorah. But that's also a Gadlus halacha. And now we have to know whether or not establishing that Gadlus requires 2 Eidim. Because right now we know he has Shtei Saros. And at one point in time, we can identify Shtei Saros, and the child has not yet reached the state of Ashi Yaakov. So if you want to change his status and remove him, therefore, thus in that way, from Ben Sorah Umorah because he has Ashi Yaakov, how do you know he reached that level? How do you establish that? Is it enough to rely on one person who checks him out, or do we need 2 Eidim? If what we're establishing is a new shear of Gadlus that's only relevant to Ben Sorah Umorah and takes him out of the parsha of Ben Sorah Umorah, Ben Sorah Umorah has to be a Ben, he has to be young. He's not totally mature yet. So there's a halach of Gadlus, which removes his status from Ben Sorah Umorah, because Ben Sorah Umorah is a kind of a katan, not a real katan. He has already Shtei Saros, but relative to Ashi Yaakov, he's a katan. Like we saw in a woman, there's Nara and then there's Bogeres. So if she has X number of Saros Levanos, she's a Nara. But if she has Y number of Saros Shchoros, she becomes a Gedolah. If Ribui Saros Shchoros. So here too, in the parallel case of Ashi Yaakov Es Hagid, which is like Ribui Saros Shchoros, there's halach of Gadlus. Again, I emphasize over and over again, this halach of Gadlus has no ramifications anywhere in halacha except for Ben Sorah Mora. But within the context of Ben Sorah Mora, there's halacha of godless, which removes him from Ben Sorah Mora. And that godless, like the godless in an Isha of Ribui Sarah Shkoros, is Yaakov is Yaakov Agir. Now, should we go a step further and say, with this parallel and say that just like in the case of establishing a Nara as a Gdola, as a Bokeres, we need to aid him, then by virtue of our analogy, the state of godless regarding Ben Sorah Mora of Yaakov also requires to aid. However, on second thought, one could argue that we don't need to aid him to establish Hakafas HaZakan, because this is not a din of godless. In Kol Kula, this young man, when he has Shtei Saras, is considered a gadol. We don't have to wait for Yaakov. And the entire halacha of Yaakov is as far as whether we put this young man to death, and the onish is misa of skila, and we can only do so before he reaches Yaakov, but not after. So this halacha of Yaakov is not really a halacha of godless, which we saw is considered a davar shebe'er and requires to aid. This halacha of Yaakov is halacha in onshim, in punishment. We don't punish him and put him to death if he already reached the age of Yaakov. So what I want to do now is take out another Rambam. Do you gentlemen have access to the Rambam? You know, I'm assuming a lot here, you know, that you could open up a Rambam, you know, with the snap of the fingers. So it'll be Torah Sheba'al Peh. Keep taking out the wrong volume, sorry. Oh, here it is. The reason why I take out the wrong volume is because I never put it back on the shelf. That's pretty typical. I want to read to you the Rambam and ask you and myself the question of onshin. In order to punish a person, is that like a davar shebe'erva, and we need two aid? Here's the case. Omar Eid Echad, one aid testifies that Chelev Kloyos Hu Zeh, or kilaye hakerem heim peris elu, or grusho zona ishazu. So a man ate chalev, and we don't know whether or not he violated the Isur chalev, because we don't know where this chalev came from, what part of the body of the animal it came from. And to give him malchus for eating chalev, we need testimony that he ate chalev. But here we only have one witness to testify that what he ate was chalev, or kilaya keren. You want to give him malchus for eating kilaya keren? Well, the Eid Echad says that those fruits that he ate are kilaya keren. Or let's say a Kohen had a relationship with a woman, and if she's a grusha or a zona, he gets malchus for that. But we need one aid, says the Rambam, to testify that that woman is indeed a grusha or a zona. Says the Rambam, there's only one aid. Achal, he ate this chalev, which we know to be chalev based on the testimony of one witness. Or he ate klaya kerem, or he was Baal. The Rambam says we have two Eidim that testify that he ate it or that he was Boil her. Akashe Hisrabo, Hareza Lok. He gets malchus. Very strange. With regard to the object that he's eating, or the woman and her status that he's having be'ila with, all we need is Eid Echad. With regard to the Maisa HaMachayev, the actual criminal act, for that we need two Eidim. So the Rambam opens up Perek Tezayin Halacha Vav with the words Eino Tzorch Shnei Eidim LaMalchus Ela B'Shas Masa. To testify on the action, we must have two Eidim. Avola Iser Atzmo, to establish that this Achila was an Achilas Chalev Asura, is be Eid Echad Yuchsach. Eid Echad is enough to establish the HaZakan. The Apol Pisha Ikara Iser Be'eid Echad. We need two Eidim on the Maisa, even though we only need one aid on the Iser Atzmo. Now, we have to establish the identity of this young man in order to punish him with Misas Bezdin. So we're not talking about the action that this man perpetrated, when he stole from his father, but rather we're talking about whether he is in the parsha of the onesh, of the punishment of Misa. So now the question becomes the testimony that he has Shtei Saras or Yaakov as a HaZakan, all of which are relevant to Onesh, to the question of whether he gets Misa or not. Do we require two Eidim, or one Eid is enough? Let's just activate the principle of a Isur B'Eid Echad Yuchsach. What I want to do now, let's just see how much time we have. Do we have another 15 minutes or so? If we do have that time, I want to read to you a paragraph that I received recently in an email from Rabbi Reichman when I asked him, do you have any insights into the 8th parak of Sanhedrin? And he writes the following. Maybe I'll, photocopy this and send it out to you. We'll see. It's just an experiment. So let's just see. He says, Yesh la'ayin. Let's analyze this. Ha'im hashir di'ad sheyakiv zokan HaTachton havi alocha b'ben sora morer v'yesh gzeres ha'kosu b'fnei atzma de'hamakiv v'sheyakiv ha'zokon eino nasa ben sora morer o dilma zel alocha v'shir b'din gadlus shel zochar. The only thing, again, it's gadlus shel zochar, like gadlus of the cave, but only with regard to ben sora. The Kamosha benara chal hashloma begadlus kishenases bogeres v'nisrabsu hashachal alohon. That's when she becomes bogeres. Hu adin the Hakafas hagid havishir b'din gadlus the zachar el shudin shenogea ach v'rak l'ben sora mod. V'itochen, the yesh b'zeh nafkemina l'dina, she'im hakafas HaZakan udin begadlus, that he becomes a gadol as far as ben sora morer, and he's out of the ballpark of ben sora morer. Azay yesh lomar to be inon shnei edim she'aidu dekvar hikiv HaZakan. Why? Because gadlus, as we saw in the Ram and Ilchus issues, is a davar shebe'erva, and a davar shebe'erva poks vishnayim. Masha enkein. Again, I keep in mind that we still don't know why one woman could check the saros and we rely on her testimony. Okay, that's a question. But we said as far as Shonim is concerned, you need two Eidim. So the Rambam activates the principle of Ein Dover Sheber Poks Mishayim with regard to Gadlus. And here also, Hakafas Hagid is halach of Gadlus with regard to Ben Sora Morer. And therefore, for Gadlus, we need two Eidim. However, that's only if we assume the parallel is correct. That just like in a Nara, her gadlus is established by Ribui Shachar, so too in Zachar, as far as Ben Sora, his gadlus is established by Hikif Esagid. Hikif Zakan shall give. But if on the other hand we say no, this is not a bidding gadlus, just it's a ptur and ownership. That once he reaches the age level of Hikif HaZakan, it's a separate halach that he's parted from Visa. We don't put him to death. So if we're going to say that the whole issue of Hikif is an issue of onshim, do we punish him, do we not? It's not a halach of gadlus, then perhaps Eid Echad would be enough. Because the Rambam says, as we saw before in Ilchus Sanhedrin, that Ha'isr al pi Eid Echad yuchzak. So you establish a cheskas isur, that this is chelev, klayakerem, azoda, etc., based on the testimony of Eid Echad. So the Ein Echad is believed to establish the nature of a Cheskas Isur. Then once the Ein Echad testifies about this, that this is Asur, now if a person implements a Maisa Avera, then we again apply the principle, the requirement of Shnei Eidim. He writes, "V'nira di'ed echad nema lahachzik is a isur rak shechal din eid echad nema b'isurim." Like, for example, according to a grusha or a zona, that's eid echad nema b'isurim. That's not a dover sheberva. There's no chiyuv kares. There's no mamzer. Aval hechad v'inin shnei edim idin ein dover sheberva poks mishnayim. Then it means that Eid Echad is not believed. The Eid Echad eino nema lahachzik isha b'cheskas eishes ish lechayvo laboel misa. So again, when the Rambam relies on one aid to establish a cheskas isha, that's only where Eid Echad never be suited. But once you jack it up to a dovish be'erva, for example, if you want to testify about this woman that she is an Eishes Ish, for that you need two Eidim. Because that's already a dovish be'erva. That's not Eid Echad then be suited. So how do we define and classify HaZakan HaTachton? Is that a din of Isurim and Eid Echad Nev Isurim, or is it a din of Gadlus? And if it's a din of Gadlus, like we saw by a Nara, we apply the principle of Ein Dovish Bever Pokus Mishnayim. So again, we had two ways of defining Achiyakif. Is it a mirror image of Ribui, Saros, Shchoros of a Nekeva, and therefore it's Halach and Gadlus? And the Rambam says that with regard to Gadlus, we apply the principle of Ein Dover Sheber V'Pochs Mishnayim. Or do we say, no, forget about that parallel to Nara. Just talk about the Ben Sorah Mor. Is he Chayiv Misa or is he not Chayiv Misa? If it's Ad Sheyakiv, he's not Chayiv Misa. But it's not a Loch of Gadlus. And then after me is going to be whether Eid Echad could testify and be believed that he already reached the level, the age of Ad Sheyakiv. He says, "I name it the sheer Zaken HaTachton, Zakan HaTachton. Have a sheer begadlus, parallel, or shall we say, a mirror image of Ribui, Saras, and Shchoros and Isha. Have a sheer begadlus, Yeshlom Deid Echad, Eino Neman Lahoy, the Hikif Zakan HaTachton. The Eid Echad Neman, B'Dova Shebe'erva." But if we're going to say no, we're not talking about a sheer godless. We're just talking about whether or not we can put him to death, and it's a halach in onshim. Then we saw already in the halach of onshim that Eid Echad is enough. Ha'isra al pi Eid Echad yuchsa, and we can give him malchus based on Eid Echad who testified that this is chelek. But again, all this is a problem for the case of Shtei Saras in an Isha, where the Ram relies on one woman's testimony. And based on that testimony, we establish her as a Gedola, as a Bogeres. What happened to him? Dover Sheber Poks Mishnayim. Hecha isha nemenis lahoid al simoni narus, meaning that one woman testifies that, right? Leah testified that Rachel has shtei saros, and we rely on this one woman. What about Ein Dovish Rebbe Pox Mishnah? So he writes here, Mavur, and with this we'll wrap it up for today. Mavur de Isha Nemenis Lahoid al Simoni Naris. The Hod is over Rambam to be in Shnei Edom Ksherim Lahoid Begadlus, as we saw with regard to Shonim. So how could one woman be believed for Simoni Naris for Shtei Saros? Hainu Rak LeInyan Edus de Shnayim. I'm sorry. Hainu Rak LeInyan Edus de Shonim. I messed up on the vowels. So that we already saw in the Rambam, that for Shonim, to establish that she's 12 years old, we need two Eidim. Eidim Ksherim. Now, even if we don't understand why, but we understand what the halacha is. The halacha is that as far as saras are concerned, one aid can be relied upon. So therefore, in the case of Hikif HaZakan, which is also an aid that's about saros, we should likewise rely on the testimony of one aid. So even if I would argue that the shear of Sheyakif HaZakan is Gadlus, as far as Ben Solomon are concerned, but it doesn't matter because even within Gadlus, we have a distinction. When it comes to identifying the Saros, we rely on one aid. And that's what we saw from the Raman Ilkas Ishus, that one woman is Nemenes relied upon to establish Saros. And therefore, in Sheyakif, it should be enough to have one aid to testify. So even though we have a principle of Ein Dovish Be'erev Pachas Mishnayim, but we're not going to apply that principle with regard to Saros, to identify Saros. Because we saw in the Rambam in Ilkas Ishus that to identify her Saros, we rely on one woman. The Yeshlomar, the Hod, the Isha, the Menes, the Simone Naris. Hainu Mishum, the Ika Chazaka, the Ruba, the Nashim, Shegiu, Lechlal Yud Beis, Yesh Chazaka, Shevia Simone. Umeacha, Sheyesh Chazaka, Shevia Simone, Shaper, the Menes Isha. Of the mirror, the Hainu Gakla Indian Simonim, the base Saros, the Yesh Bazeh Chazaka, the Ruba. The Mishum Hachi Isha Nemenis Lomar Sheyesh Lebas Shtei Saros. So the testimony of the Eid Echad is only to support that chazaka, that if she reached that age, which we've established based on Shnei Eidim, then she probably has Sarah. So we rely on one aid. And that's called Rov and Chazaka. Masechet Hakafas HaZakan HaTachton lekach HaZakan derova. We can't operate with a HaZakan derova. We don't know at what point this young man is going to reach the stage of Hakafas HaZakan HaTachton. And therefore, I name the shir Hakafas HaZakan HaTachton of the shir gadlus. Azai be'inan shnei edim lahoy bazer l'shitas aram. So again, just to summarize, and then we'll let you go. We don't know whether this halacha of Achi Yaakov HaZakan HaTachton is a shir in gadlus, as far as Ben Soreh, or it's a separate halacha in Onsh. If it's a shir in gadlus, then the Rambam's principle is that in gadlus we need shnei edim because it's a davar shemerva and ain't davar shemerva box mishnai. If on the other hand it's only a din in onshim, then the Rambam has a different principle that applies. Ha-iser v'eid echad yuchsak. We only need one aid. But then what we're saying is that even if I grant you that Achi Yaakov is a shir in gadlus, it still is quite possible that one aid would suffice. And why is that? Because with regard to the shir of gadlus in Isha, we rely on one aid to testify in the saros, and that's based on HaZakan and Rov. Is there a parallel with regard to Achi Yaakov HaZakan? And he's insisting that there is no parallel, and therefore the regular halacha, the original halacha that in gadlus we need as a davar shemerva to either would apply to Achi Yaakov. You'll ask me, but ha'isa beit echad yofsak, that's in a davar sheme'isa, like the cases that we had there of Chalem and Kalai Kerem and Zona and Grusha. But in the case of davar sheme'erva, which is gadlus, then we require two either. So if this halacha, the shir of Achi Yaakov is halacha in gadlus, then we require two either. You'll ask me, but even with regard to gadlus, we saw that the Rama in Ilchos Ishus relies on the testimony of one witness. So what happened to Ein Davar Shemerva Pox Nishnayim? So the answer is that even in a Davar Shemerva, like gadlus, if we have a Rov and a Chazaka, because we know her age, then we'll rely on one age. But in a parallel case of gadlus in Zachar, with regard to Ben Soreh, namely Achi Yaakov, we don't have any Rov or Chazaka. We have no clue at what point he will reach Achi Yaakov. So therefore, we're going to go back to the original halacha that with regard to gadlus, ein davar shemerva pox mishnayim, and will lead two eidim to testify Achi Yaakov. Okay, then? So this is where we'll stop for today. Thank you so much.